Is capitalism an algorithm gone wrong? This is something very deep to my heart. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I think it's about time for me to come out with this episode and talk about this. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's July 13th, 2020. This is Krim Delko. Before I go into the subject, let me give you an update. Today, the market is down about 1%. The fund is down 9%. So for the year, we are up 128%. The market is down around 2.5%. So we're outperforming by about 130%. Now, today was a day, one of those days. We were up at some point around 20% and we're down 9%. So we had an intraday reversal of almost 30% in our assets. And I want to just mention this because I want to come back to the purpose of this podcast, which is to give people a feel for what it feels like to run a hedge fund, not just what it is like. And of course, I'm giving a lot of thoughts and intellectual content here that people can process, but the way it feels is, I would say, the most important thing for anybody who is contemplating this career. And today is a great day to illustrate how difficult this business is. So you're up 20, now you're down 9, so you're basically intraday 30%. What's even worse is this morning we were having a debate if we should buy puts on Tesla, and I decided not to, and that was about $300 ago. So we don't want to sell the stock, but we are not against taking short-term profits if we can through options, and this was one of those situations where we should have done it. Well, we didn't, and life has to go on. I think the reversal today is one of those technical reversals, like traders say. We're not concerned about the fundamentals of Tesla. We think Tesla in the long run will do very well. In the short run, corrections are inevitable, and this was one that we actually predicted, and we could have made a lot of money. It's well possible that we see another $300-400 correction. This is something we have to live with. I don't think at this point it's worth buying puts anymore, and therefore we will just ride this through. And just to summarize today's action, there is also the earnings season coming up, and people probably taking some money off the table before those numbers come out. Now let's get to the topic of capitalism as an algorithm. And well, did it go wrong? That's the question. And I want to say, my thesis is that yes, capitalism is an algorithm gone wrong, and it's going wrong pretty dramatically, actually. And I think we have some serious problems to deal with. We have some good things also happening, and I want to elaborate all of this. First of all, what is capitalism? Capitalism is an economic system that is based on private ownership and the profit motive. That this is the most concise definition I can give. I think there's a lot more to say about it, but it's private ownership and profit motive. So we start, it's almost like a Stefan Wolfram type cellular automata. So you start with a very simple rule, and then you grow, and you get from 1750 to 2020, you go from muskets and farming to iPhones, Teslas, and landings on the moon, and starships and all that in 250 years. The 250 years before 1750, so 1500 to 1750, we really didn't have a lot of innovation in America. The Native Americans were conquered by the Europeans, but their structures didn't really change much. The one innovation that the Europeans brought was guns, and that helped them conquer the country. But it really wasn't a lot more than that. So I would attribute the extreme progress that has been made in the last 250, 300 years to the algorithm of capitalism, to private ownership and profit motive. Those are the two things. Of course, it's related to democracy. And if you want to have a bit of a general view on or definition of capitalism, it's a decentralized form of resource allocation. So it's decentralized, and therefore it has to be algorithmic, because we don't have this top-down natural way of the king deciding based on a spiritual story what to do and using violence to enforce the law. It was decentralized, and capitalism was in a very cellular automata type of way. Very simple rules: private ownership, profit motive, And then we get this huge complexity called modern global trade. Now, why do I think it's gone wrong? I think it's gone wrong because private ownership implies skin in the game. And I think where we're going wrong, particularly in the last 100 years, is that we're starting to substitute the skin in the game motive with a outsourcing of risk to society. Let me elaborate. So, for example, if I go back 100, 150 years ago, the jobs that most people aspire to were things like priest, a little bit of technician, maybe even engineer, but they weren't jobs like banker, consultant, journalist, things like that. They didn't exist. And I think those are the types of jobs that today are prevalent in our society. They pay a lot, they consume a lot of resources. In a sense, they don't add a lot of value, but they do consume a lot of resources. And I think all these jobs have one thing in common, which is that they privatize action and outsource risk to society. So if you succeed, you get the money. If you fail, it's somebody else's fault. Investing, hedge fund managers, venture capitalists, whoever you want to name, they all go around, talk about how smart they are, how intelligent, how risk-taking and all that. But if you really look at their positions and their actual skin in the game, it's very, very limited. The same applies for consultants, who are even worse in a sense that their job almost by definition excludes judgment. So they are paid to give stories to other people that then have to exercise judgment. And even, unfortunately, journalism, and I myself know that very well. I'm a journalist myself. I write columns. And it's unfortunate that journalism has morphed into this, like, if I'm right, I'm the star. If I'm wrong, well, it's the profession or it's somebody else's fault. Even there, it's, for example, we glorify investigative journalism. When you really look at investigative journalism today, it's people picking up the phone, talking to other people and writing stories. And then every once in a while, something hits the jackpot and then they are the geniuses. When, let's say people like Solzhenitsyn or Günter Wallraff in Germany, two names I could now on top of my head, there's many others who have done really investigative journalistic work, which has actually been there, put themselves in situations and then written about it. This is really investigative journalism. And of course, that is very rare today. So we have the lack of skin in the game, which I think was originally planned by this algorithm called capitalism. Whoever's come up with it, Adam Smith and the people around him and all those people who took those ideas and started pushing for the system, I think it was implicit that there has to be skin in the game, which means if you fail, you fail. And of course, you want to have some sort of safety net. I'm not saying that people should fail if they're wrong, but people should not be allowed to outsource risk to society and blame others for their own failure, because then you have automatically lack of accountability, which is another trait of today's capitalism. So I think that, therefore, I do think that capitalism as we have it today is an algorithm gone wrong, because there's a lack of skin in the game, which has, as a consequence, lack of accountability. And those are two traits that are absolutely paramount in the functioning of the decentralized resource allocation. Otherwise, we have profiteering very similar to feudalism, communism, any kind of ism that you can think of other than capitalism, because that's exactly what happened in those societies, that you had this layer of people around the monarchs who were adding very little value to society but sucking a lot of resources. And do I have any suggestions how to fix that? I mean, I do. I think we increase accountability. It starts at home, actually. I think it starts with education. Your own kids, raising your own kids with accountability is definitely a good start. I think at the higher level, I think we have a system of fortune. Not everything is bad. Even the investment world, which is full of people that outsource failure and privatize gains, even there is still some sliver of hope that, because we don't have a better system, in fact, that at least in certain cases, people with accountability, disruptors, visionary entrepreneurs that are able to execute visionary plans are still. And I think that's really the key. reward accountability, reward purpose, reward success with purpose, and find ways to punish profiteering and outsourcing of risk to society. Just to finish, I think the most skeptical sign of capitalism gone wrong, actually, it's not the fact that we have so many consultants or so-called investigative journalists or bankers and investors. The problem is we have enormous amounts of debt in the society, and I think that is a clear sign for capitalism gone wrong. It's not supposed to be like that. We are not supposed to have massive, massive deficits on the government level. We are not supposed to have a society that cannot live a few months without salaries. We are supposed to have a society which is able to plan, able to execute, able to take risk without this constant reliance on debt. That is not a good thing. That is supposed to be there for people to borrow money to invest into the future and not to pay for their current consumption and their lack of accountability and their lack of value added. Thanks.